This is Jennifer Hale, and you're listening to the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. And, I should go.
The tangents this week continue all the way to episode 253 of the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please, won't you be my neighbor? Welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. So glad you could join us. Let's start off like a do-over on the virtual table and see who's joined us this week.
This is Brittany in the neighborhood.
This is Chrissy in the neighborhood.
This is Holly in the neighborhood.
And this is Rachel in the neighborhood of make-believe. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Everybody
I always said
got
I
their
would
cardigan?
never sing on this podcast. But I have to
You
make
did
an
well,
exception.
Rachel. Yes.
Yeah, that one has to be that one has to be done.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just a little. So, thankfully, I did not have to change my coat and or shoes. I'm already in a comfy sweater and tennis shoes. So, and actually, my T-shirt with trolley on it, but we'll get to that.
We can pretend.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, before we get to, I would say before we get to this week's talk, let's do the news. But we don't have any news,
Which is kind of a rarity for us, but
Yeah.
okay.
It's getting into the holidays. Everybody's too busy watching everything on Disney Plus. So,
Probably.
Yeah.
or one little piece of news: Disney Plus had 10 million subscribers within the first 24 hours.
Are we honestly surprised by that?
Apparently, Disney's stock went up.
Yeah, and most people I've seen who are all like, because there are people like, oh, I don't want to buy another streaming service or whatever, and most people have been like, look, they have Darkwing Duck and they have gargoyles. I am sold.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, that's about where I am too.
Yeah.
There's recess.
But that's going to be a topic for a few weeks from now. So there's that. So yeah, no news, but we do have some feedback from Shalane talking about our most recent episode about spoilers. And she says that she has spoiled herself with some TV shows like Friends and some movies like the live action Beauty and the Beast. She says sometimes she'll read comments on social media about a movie to see if it was good or not, which, you know, it's depending on where you go. There's some people are good about having like dedicated like comment threads where it's like, give your opinion on the movie without spoiling anything. So if you've got a place to go that can do something like that, that's great. She says that when The Force Awakens came out, someone commented that Han Solo dies, and she wasn't sure if it was true or not. Of course, obviously, spoiler alert, it was true.
Yeah.
She said, you don't suspect great people to die, like characters like Dumbledore and Han Solo, but it happens. She's like, I just ignored it and went on enjoying herself. So, and then she says she also remembers at some point talking about Disney trips and how you may or may not want to spoil a theme park ride because, you know, what people put up videos and stuff, which I will sometimes, if it depends. If I know I'm going soon enough, that I know that the time between, you know, ride videos coming out and me actually going I'm not likely to spoil myself, then I won't. But if it's something like temporary, like right now they've got the temporary fireworks show at Epcot, I'm not going to go before that leaves. So I've gone ahead and watched it and spoiled myself on it. So, because I'm never going to see it in person. So,
Right.
again,
that
it's
kind of thing is, that seems like a different sort of
Mhm.
of deal. And
Yeah.
like you said, if you're not going to make it in time before it leaves, then go ahead.
Yeah.
And that's not something like, you post a movie or something on YouTube. But that gets into copyright, whatever. This is like people on vacation.
Yeah.
Filming the fireworks show.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So again, just like in our actual spoiler discussion, it's a situational thing.
Of course.
So
Mm-hmm.
you got to kind of pick and choose your battles when it comes to spoilers.
Because I think when I went to Florida with the Indiana Jones like stunt spectacular, they had a couple different versions. So we went to see it a couple of times, and it's like, and because the first two we saw, there was the same, and then somebody was just like, oh yeah, this happens, and I'm like, okay, we'll go back. I mean, we enjoyed it, and we got the other the other take, because it was like, oh, you didn't know they changed it up.
Yeah.
So then you got
Like,
more.
Right, like, so it was kind of spoiled, but it was kind of like a nice, ooh, we want to see that.
Yeah.
Kind of a spoil. So a spoiler surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like the great movie ride, may it rest in peace. Unless you were going when it was extremely busy, it would at the point where you would get an interactive experience would almost always be in the gangster area. But if it was busy enough and they were running more trains, then there's also an interactive experience in the cowboy western area. But
neat.
most of the time when I went, it was never busy enough. So we always got the gangsters and hardly ever the cowboys. So it's like, I didn't even know how the cowboy thing went for a while. So, because it's like you go through the cowboy area regardless, but if you don't get the interactive, then it's a different experience. So that's one of those things where it's like, if you're not riding when it's busy enough, you don't realize that there's a completely different experience that you could have. So yeah, again, situational.
Of course.
But we appreciate the feedback.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, that was short. So that just means we get to spend more time talking about this week's topic. So, and it works out well that as we're recording this Friday, the bio movie, I guess, about Mr. Rogers starring Tom Hanks is released to the general public. I've already seen it. And I can give my non-spoiler review of it. And it just so happens that last Wednesday was World Kindness Day as well. And the hospital in Pittsburgh, all the babies that were born last Wednesday all got their own little Mr. Rogers outfits.
It was so adorable.
Yep. And Fred's wife came to visit and see all the babies.
And she was the picture of her when she walked in and saw the babies. It was so cute.
Yes.
like there is nothing about this article that I do not like.
Yep. So we're just in a very, very Mr. Rogers neighborhood state of mind, as everybody should be all the time. So we thought we would take this week's episode to take a look at everyone's favorite neighbor. Starting with Fred himself, for those that, because the documentary that came out last year didn't necessarily get into like the typical like stuff that, like, if you're doing a documentary on a person, like this person was born on this day to these people in this city.
Yeah, it was more of a documentary about the show itself and not so much
him.
Him. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Tom Hanks movie is not either, because it focuses on this very specific time frame of when this guy was doing this article. So you don't get the background, a lot of the background stuff. So for the people that don't know, Fred McFeely Rogers was born on March 20th, 1928 in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. He was an only child until the age of 11, when his parents adopted a daughter named Elaine.
Which is funny because Alex, one of the shows Alex loves to watch is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and it's the one, like, before bedtime we'll watch it just to kind of calm things down and sort of thing. And we just watched last night's episodes that we watched was, it mentioned adoption, and he talked about when his parents adopted his younger sister.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And
cool.
it was, and I'm like, oh, this is so sweet. And like they had a segment in Neighborhood of Make Believe about, because one of the families there adopted a kid, and Anna Platypus was asking, like, well, how does adoption work? And why did the baby didn't grow in her mommy's tummy? And and so her father was explaining like what adoption was and what it all meant. And I was like, that's a very, very good way to explain it. Like, it was, you could tell it was the week they were talking about families, and like maybe earlier in the week they talked about babies and all that kind of stuff. But I'm like, there we go.
Yep. Yeah. So his parents, his father was a businessman. He was president of the McFeely Brick Company, and then his mother's father, Fred Brooks McFeely, who Fred's named after, was also an entrepreneur. But his mom knitted sweaters, as we know, because she knitted all the sweaters that we saw him wear on the show. But before that, she knitted sweaters for soldiers from Pennsylvania who were fighting in Europe. I'm assuming during the Second World War. So she was handy with those knitting needles, just knitting sweaters for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sounds like she. How many did she knit that Fred wore on the show?
Yeah.
Which is very sweet that
Yes.
he wore all those.
Yep. As a kid, he was a very quiet, shy, introverted child. He was overweight and was teased and bullied by kids. He also suffered from apparently really bad asthma.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a very lonely childhood. So that's how he learned to play make-believe. So and then when he got to high school, he began to overcome his shyness, lost weight, and then started making friends. So eventually he became president of the student council and was a member of the National Honor Society and editor-in-chief of the school yearbook.
Cool.
Yep. So then he went to Dartmouth College for 1 year before transferring to Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, where he graduated magna cum laude in 1951 with a degree in music composition.
Cool. Neat.
So
It's so interesting, like, going through this little bio of him. It's like you talked about how, you know, he played with stuffed animals and created his own world when he was a kid because he didn't have a lot of friends, and then he graduates in music, and it's like all of these things build up, and it's like, oh, that's where that came from and why he did it, why he did those things in the show.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So he's actually got several ties to Florida, which I did not realize until I was doing more research, because it kind of confused me. Because if you watch, if I can find this, I'll see if I can find the specific videos. But if you watch the Tim Tracker, who is him and his wife are Orlando area based vloggers, and they're theme park enthusiasts, so they visit all the Disney and Universal and SeaWorld and all the Disney parks. But they've done a couple of boat rides with some people that go past. It's I guess, I don't know if it's like a Geist or something, or some sort of body of water in Central Florida that is surrounded by houses, like nice houses, and they a couple times they've pointed out that one of the houses belonged to Mr. Rogers, and it always confused me. It's like, no, he's from Pittsburgh. Like, what do you mean talking about Mr. Rogers in a house in Florida? No, apparently he lived in Florida for a time, so yes, he did have a house in Florida.
It says his wife was from Jacksonville, so
yeah,
and they met while they were both in college down there, so
yeah.
So yeah, his hometown might have been Pittsburgh, but Florida was sort of his second home away from home, sort of. Kind of.
Yeah,
in a way.
So he graduated from, got his his bachelor's or whatever in music composition, and he wanted to go into the seminary. So he went to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary and was ordained a minister of the United Presbyterian Church, and that was in 1963. But it wasn't until it was also during that time that he met what's her name? I can't. Dang it. I thought I wrote it down. Now I'm lost it. Anyway, at some point during that point, he met up with I think she's like a child psychologist or something like that. And they ended up working together because he wanted to go into television because he didn't like television and he thought that it could be used in a better way, essentially. He had some previous experience in television after graduating high school. He worked as a floor director for a number of shows and an assistant producer for another show. And then he worked as a program developer at the public television station WQED, where they developed a show, The Children's Corner, which was actually hosted by a different person. And he worked off camera, developing the puppets and doing some of the music. And at that point, he developed some of the characters that we've come to know and love, like Daniel Striped Tiger. And while he was working on that he was going to the seminary Yeah, Margaret McFarland. There we go. I knew. Now I got her name somewhere. She's a child psychologist. He started working with her while he was at the Graduate School of Child Development, and they became like lifelong collaborators. But what a lot of people might not know is it wasn't the jump from high school to college to graduate school to the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood that we know and love with the Children's Corner in between. But actually in 1963, after he had finished at seminary, he got a offer to do a show in Canada for the Canadian Broadcasting Company. So they offered him to come to Toronto to do a children's program. However, Fred had to come out from behind the scenes and actually be on camera, which he agreed to. So they moved to Toronto and planned and worked out how the show was going to work. And then the show started running their second year in Canada, and it was called Mr. Rogers, all one word.
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
It looks really weird. You think
does.
it's like a typo or something. No, it was called Mr. Rogers, and it's all one word.
And if you have Amazon Prime, like at least I think it's still on there. They have they have like the first week worth of episodes are in black and white, and the title is written that way, and it's like that stylized. So they like use the R in the middle, and it's like it's the font swoops down and loops around, and so it works as both the end of Mr. and the beginning of Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you have Amazon Prime, look that up on streaming, and it's kind of odd. I mean, you think about TV Tropes has a category called early installment weirdness, and yeah, this definitely qualifies.
Yep.
But I mean, it's weird in a good way, because you kind of realize, okay, yeah, this is very, very early days. I mean, this show ran for 30, almost 40 years. I mean, there's going to be changes over time.
Yeah. So yeah, the show in Canada ran until the middle of 1964. But it was kind of the precursor to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's just it was 15 minutes, so it wasn't very long, but it gave him an opportunity to flesh out a lot of the characters that we would get to know, like Lady Elaine, King Friday the 13th, X the Owl, characters like that. So that was, I guess, probably a good thing, because it allowed him to kind of flesh out these characters. So that when they came back to Pittsburgh, because it was a number of reasons why they decided to leave Canada. It was a combination of wanting to be closer to family, because now they had two sons that were very young. Their visitor status in Canada, they would have either had to apply for citizenship or extend their visa. So they just decided to return to Pittsburgh. So when they came back, he actually got he was working with children at a church, a Presbyterian church, while waiting for WQED to secure the funding for a children's program. So in the meantime, he started another afternoon program for WTAE, a commercial Pittsburgh television station that ran October through December of 1965. But during that time, he started to collect some of the cast and crew that would eventually be part of the neighborhood. So eventually, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was brought together and was on WTAE for till 1966. And then the Eastern Educational Network from late 66 until the page I'm on, it's very long, till 1967.
Sounds about right. So about 7 months.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, I'm doing the math right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's all the television he did essentially before we got Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that we all know and love. So that debuted October 15th, 1962. No, that was Mr. Rogers. The national debut was 1968, February 19th, 1968.
Well, this story here about the open house in Boston is kind of it's a little
which
nuts.
is in the so like I think it's the same one that's in the documentary where they're like, oh yeah, we'll probably get a couple hundred people show up, and like 10,000 people show
10,000. And they compare it to like the attendance numbers at a Red Sox game, which you know Boston makes sense, but it's like, and then that's what got the Sears Roebuck Foundation to be like, okay, sure, we'll fund this for you.
Yeah.
Which if you grew up watching, you grew up watching Mr. Rogers. They always had, they always mentioned that it was funded by the Sears Roebuck Foundation, and it's like, okay, cool.
Yeah, because for that first initial run from October 66 to May to 67, it was strictly aired in Pittsburgh with that funding. And in the second year, the Eastern Educational Network offered a chance to be broadcast. It was broadcast in Boston, Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, Miami, and San Francisco. But they were still suffering for funding. So they did the publicity in Boston, had the open house, and had 10,000 people show up. So Sears Roebuck, which Sears is now defunct pretty much everywhere, but
well, back in the day, they were a big deal.
Yes, they were big. They were a big deal. So the national program that we know brought to you by the Sears Roebuck Foundation was February 19th, 1968, that's the day after my birthday, although I wasn't alive in 1968, but that's actually my mother-in-law's birthday. She was alive then. I won't say how old she was, though. I will save her with that. Not that she'll likely hear this, but still. So Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that we know and love ran from 68 to 2001. Not continuously, though, which is something I did not know until the documentary. Seeing it last year, where it talks about how it ran from 68 to 76. And then Mr. Fred took some time off to do a more, I don't want to say adult oriented, but it was aimed towards adults, called Old Friends, New Friends, which ran from 78-ish until he decided to come back and pick up Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 79. And then it ran continuously until 2001 when Fred retired. And then he passed 2 years later. So, but that was one of those things that was like, what? I thought it was on the entire time. Like I was alive then to know that it had even gone off the air for a while. It technically had not really gone off the air because they had stuff pre-taped. So that the show could still run. It's just he was not actively participating in filming any more episodes.
Yeah. Well, I had read somewhere like he purposely, and especially during the when home video became a thing, he purposely created the show. Like even if you watch the very last episodes that ever aired, they don't make a big deal about, oh, this is the end, because he wanted to, they could do repeats, or if you, videotape them at home, parents could watch them with their kids, or, that kind of thing. So that's like when I'm watching him on YouTube, I'm like, this is something Mr. Rogers would have loved. Like, all his stuff is on the internet for, like, I mean, I grew up with this stuff. I'm showing it to my little boy, and this is something that he totally would have embraced. I mean, there's even a time when, because they were talking, like, somebody, when videotape came out, and like you can record whatever, and some, studios were like, oh, you can't, that's copyright infringement, blah blah blah, which, whatever. Well, that's another topic for their day. But Mr. Rogers was like, well, no, I want people to be able to tape my shows and watch them again and again. Especially if it's something that, if the topic is something pertinent to the people who are watching it. So, so every time I pull it up on YouTube, I'm like, this is something he would have just embraced. I'm sure.
And this is the guy who went in front of Congress to have them not cut funding for PBS. I mean, he was a big supporter.
Yeah, because it's like the show that we know took off in '68. A year later, Congress or the Senate is threatening. It wasn't actually Senate. It was Richard Nixon who was threatening to cut funding to just public television in general, the arts, and Fred was just one of a number of people that were brought in to testify to a U.S. Senate subcommittee. And again, you can see, if you've seen the documentary, that Fred was one of the last people to testify. And at that point, the guy that was head of the hearing was like over it.
Right.
Just all these people just spouting out, just numbers and statistics and just, very droll, drab stuff. So once it came to, just reading off of their notes. So when it came to Fred's turn, he was like, I've got these notes. I'm just going to, I'm not going to read them directly. I'm going to reference them. And in less than 10 minutes, he managed to not only get the funding that they were going to lose, but almost double the funding.
Yeah. And a lot of people have seen the clip, and if you haven't, you can search it online.
I've got a link to it in the notes. So
it'll be on our show notes, but it's just like, you sit there for hours and hours, like Rachel said. It's just this dry statistical information. And I mean, think about when you've been sitting through a lecture, whether it's in school or somewhere else, and it's just a bunch of numbers. And unless you're a numbers geek, that stuff puts you to sleep. You're thinking, when's lunch? But then, here comes this unassuming Fred Rogers, comes up and says, look, this is what I do. This is what my show means to people. This is what and he's not like boasting. Like, there is never a boastful bone in that man's body, ever. He just is like, this is my goal. This is what I want to do. And he did it. And so they finally were just like, oh, well, okay, well, there's a good reason to keep it. And, and it wasn't about all that dry, boring crap.
Mm-hmm.
It actually had some, human meaning to it.
Yep.
It's I don't want to say it's a beautiful thing, but it kind of is, because you can tell he's just, speaking from the heart. He's like, I work with children. I understand how children think, and I know that this is important.
Yeah. And it's not like he was, sitting up there like, oh, I've got to do this to fight for my job, or, have any self-serving reason for it. He's like, he genuinely wants to help kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the difference in a lot of these things between what Mr. Rogers does and I don't know, I can't think of another example to compare it to, but
yeah.
But it's just, he was one of a kind, man. He was like,
yeah.
I mean, goodness knows we could do with a lot more of him, but we'll take who we got.
Yeah. So, because I mean, that was his thing, is he just wanted to. In the episode, all the episodes are like that. Whether they're talking about something innocuous like, learning to tie your shoe, all the way up to some very serious topics. So when the first stint or the first run of it before he took that small break, they just kind of every episode was its own self-contained, and then I think in the 80s really is when it started to focus on each week of episodes would have a theme. And like the story, the Land of Make Believe story would also have something, a plot line that would go through the entire week, and then by Friday it would be resolved, whatever the issue is. But so like Chrissy said, he had an episode about adoption, in the late 70s when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. It's brought up. I mean, Kennedy's never ever mentioned specifically by name, but there's a conversation between Daniel and Lady Aberlin, and he's asking her, about assassination. What does it mean? And she's like, oh, that happened to that man, and she's like, yeah, talking about referencing Robert Kennedy. So they did a whole week about conflict, and there's this whole plot line where they think that King Friday thinks that one of the adjacent neighborhoods is going to maybe attack their neighborhood, and he puts a barbed wire around the castle.
And it's kind of played for laughs a little bit if you've seen it, because King Friday, he's kind of a bumbler. He means well, but at the same time, it's a good way to explain to kids. Which, I mean, there's some things I'm like, I'm not looking forward to having to explain X, Y, and Z to my child when he gets old enough to hear about these things, whatever X, Y, and Z ends up being. But, having some way to, I mean, it's not, Mr. Rogers didn't do that stuff just for kids. He also did it kind of for parents, too. It's like, here's a way where, you as an adult can explain these things in an appropriate way to young kids. And I'm like sitting there going like, oh my gosh, Mr. Rogers was teaching me how to be a parent long before I ever thought about being a parent. Right. And just all these. And so, you know how we talk about how, you watch something that you watched as a kid and you get something out of it different as an adult. I'm kind of experiencing this these days. just, I sit there with my little boy and just watch this and I'm like, man, Mr. Rogers, you're so awesome.
Or too, it gives you a good jumping off point for when you get to that section. It's like, hey, let's sit down and watch Mr. Rogers, but make sure that episode's pulled up and then start the conversation.
Yeah, because I'm just kind of like, and I'm sure other parents feel this way, like, oh my gosh, is my kid's going to come home from school or see something on TV or just hear something. I mean, I'm pretty sure the whole assassination topic, like they just heard this word and they're like, I don't know what that means. And, they go to, Daniel goes to an adult and says, what does it mean? And, and Lady Aberlin explains it to him.
Yeah, I always, it's like the show is so formulaic, but the formula just worked regardless of the topic, and how they managed to, keep it cohesive, even if it seemed like stuff was just, random. Like, Fred would always come in and sing and put on his cardigan and change his shoes. At some point, we'd go to the Land of Make Believe. Usually, at some point, someone would come visit him.
Yep.
Oftentimes it was Mr. McFeely, which obviously the name McFeely comes from Fred's maternal grandfather, and Fred's middle name too. And sometimes if Mr. McFeely would bring him something, oftentimes I don't know about you guys, but I always wanted a video. movie of some sort to show on picture.
Yes, because usually it was like, here's how something is made, and it's just so fascinating.
How you make crayons, which I think is everybody's personal favorite.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
Although
Love
the one about birthday candles is good too.
Yeah.
Of course, I saw that one yesterday, so that's why I'm thinking of it. But yeah, the crayons one everybody loves.
Yeah. I just always loved watching something on picture. It's always funny though as you get older and you watch and you see him. You like early days it would be like a reel of film, or in later days it became a VHS, and you can watch him pop it in. It's like he's not actually putting it in anything to actually play it.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was a kid. It's like, is there a VCR back there? I don't think so, but
but we didn't care. We wanted to see, a short movie about how they make towels, or something like that. And you can find a lot of those on YouTube. There's also the actual official Mr. Rogers website alternates. Every month you get a handful of actual episodes, and then you can get some of the factory visits and stuff like that too. So I've got so many links in the show notes. Y'all are gonna be busy clicking away. So you can go there, and obviously YouTube. There's a lot out there.
Oh yeah. YouTube, Amazon Prime has them as far as I know.
Yeah. I always liked when he would go somewhere in the neighborhood though, and go visit someone else, and not necessarily one of the other neighbors. Like some of the neighbors and a lot of the humans in the neighborhood of Make Believe translated over to the actual neighborhood, and they always made sure to distinct that that there wasn't a whole lot of crossover, although occasionally Mr. Rogers would be mentioned in the neighborhood of Make Believe, but really he wanted to have that delineation of when we see Fred, it's the real world. When we're in the neighborhood of Make Believe, it is pretend. Those those people are different, even though you may see Mr. McFeely in Make Believe, or you may see Chef Brockett in,
or Bob, Robert Troll and Bob Dog are actually Bob Tro.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, well, I always thought, because Mr. Rogers sits down, he brings out Trolley, and he says, let's pretend, and he explains what they're going to pretend in Neighborhood of Make Believe, and sends Trolley to the neighborhood. So it's like he's imagining this story, and you're imagining it with him. And then Trolley, after the segment's over, Trolley comes back, and there's Mr. Rogers, and he kind of does a little explanation of what's just happened, and if it continues, and we'll imagine more, or we'll make believe more about that next time. So I just always figured, hey, he's imagining it and I'm imagining it with him. Cool. We're telling a story.
And
Trolley. And he imagines all his neighborhood friends are characters in make believe.
Sometimes it wasn't actually the life-size Trolley. He also had the playset in the kitchen. In that corner display, and he would sometimes bring them down, and he had a little miniature trolley that was part of that set. So
I remember wanting that, just one for myself, and I was so upset when I found out that I couldn't. My parents couldn't find it in the store. This was years before the internet. You could find it on Amazon or eBay or whatever. But it was so cool. Last year for Halloween, we did a Mr. Rogers family Halloween, and Alex was Mr. Rogers. We got him a little sweater, and he just wore his church clothes with a pair of tennis shoes. And Jared and I were King Friday and Queen Sarah. Anyway, we found a toy trolley, and I was just like, I would have loved to have that as a kid. And he still has it, and he still plays with it. Of course, it's a Daniel Tiger trolley, but it still works. It has a little bell. It's cute.
I
And it made the
I
whole
had a I had a Daniel striped tiger for puppet for a while, and eventually he lost one of his eyes.
Oh.
And then I don't know what happened to him. I think he just got so shabby that he needed to move on to wherever Stripe the Tigers go to retire. But yeah, I just if you are fortunate enough to either live in the area or can go, so I guess we can kind of move on to the legacy, because obviously there's a lot there that we could go into with the television show. There's 895 episodes.
You got some,
of the
you
show
got some
titled
to do.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So that doesn't even include like the shows before or the show he did in the middle. So just Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, 895 episodes. So there's a lot there. I mean, we could easily talk about like all the celebrity appearances that that have been on this show.
Well, I want to point one thing out. Because there were a lot of celebrity appearances, and whether it was, Wynton Marsalis came on, or one of the football players from the Pittsburgh Steelers, which that's one of my favorite episodes because he is also a dancer. And he talks about, going because, dancing and football actually have a lot of connection. But, whether it was a well-known celebrity or if Mr. Rogers had a child guest, it's like he gave the same care and attention no matter who he was talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, usually when you have like special famous guests on a show, they make a big deal out of it. And they're like, oh my goodness, come watch our show because we've got this great big name star. And Mr. Rogers never did any of that. He's just like, if he had a musician on, he'd ask him about like, when did you start, or how did you do these things? Or, if it was a child or, a regular person, there was one episode where he goes to a dairy farm and he asks the lady who owns the dairy farm, like, how do these things work? And he's just so interested in whatever this person he's talking to is interested in, whether it's football or raising dairy cows.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's Mr. Rogers right there.
Yeah.
Everybody was important to him.
Yeah. And he was in throughout the different segments in the show, it was always done in a way where it was strictly informational. Yep. And not like a teacher trying to teach students something, or preachy, like, if like
you're going to be tested on it later.
Yeah. Like, like the episode where one of the goldfish die, he easily could be like, say things like, tell kids that, if you're sad, do X, Y, and Z or whatever. But no, instead he was like, he just taught through example. Instead of telling them what to do, he just did it. Mm-hmm. And they could extrapolate from that, it's like, when his goldfish died, and it goes from that to him telling a story about how he had a dog when he was a kid. That dog eventually died, and how he was sad. But then he's like, I have fond memories of this dog, and that makes me happy. Mm-hmm. And, a little kid watching that would be like, oh, if I have a pet or or something that I care about passes away, I will be, it's okay to be sad, but it's okay to remember the good, happy things about them too. So it was just, it's one of those, like, he knew what kids were capable of doing, and he never talked down to them or, treated them like they were not as smart as adults. He always just made sure that the content was appropriate for the age that they were catering to, but it was never, trying to psychoanalyze his audience.
Yeah. And like watching it now, I'm sitting there going like, I was like, wow, like he really has a lot of faith in kids. And there's some things that I'm like, would I be able to explain a certain topic to a child who asked me about it? And what's the level of appropriateness? Like I was saying before, how would I explain something, a heavy topic? And it's like, Mr. Rogers felt like kids could understand things like adoption, divorce, assassination, conflict. At the same time, he's telling them about, bath time is okay, and you're not going to go down the drain. Because he got a letter from a kid, or he talked to a child who, or the child's parent who was like, my kid is afraid of going, has a fear of getting sucked down the drain in the bathtub. And, had a segment where he was in, he filled up the bathtub, pulled the plug, and he's like, you're too big. You're too big to go down the drain.
There's the whole song about it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He even wrote a song for it. And I'm just like,
you can never go down, can never go down, can never go down the drain. You can never go down, can never go down, can never go down the drain. You're bigger than the water, you're bigger than the soap. You're much bigger than all the bubbles, and bigger than your telescope. So you see, you can never go down, can never go down, can never go down the drain.
And I'm like, I'd never seen that one before. I can't remember where I
That
pulled
song
it.
set.
Yeah. And I was like, holy cow, he covered everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's why I'm like, I need all these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and again, I will have a link in the show notes. But
yes,
there
I mean,
is
I'm gonna go combing through that, because there's some episodes that keep coming up on the YouTube algorithm, and I'm like, okay, that's nice. We've seen that one. Let's find something new, please.
Yeah, but there's a fan run website called the Neighborhood. It's not the neighborhood. It's called neighborhoodarchive.com. And what you can do is you can go. It'll goes through all the shows. So Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Mr. Rogers' Children's Corner, Old Friends, New Friends. But Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, you can look up the shows and get synopsis and stuff either by year with the show number. So if you know what year it came out, you can go looking for it, or at least try to. But then they also have, and that's all of them. But then they also have a list of some of the, I guess, probably most popular topics with the show numbers next to them, and you can click on them. So, like, you want to see the episodes where he talks about divorce, there's the episodes right there, and you can click on them. So you can look for the numbers. And there's some classics like The Birth of Prince Tuesday, The Death of a Goldfish, that sort of thing. And then you can also look, it also has a list of all the episodes that contain all the operas.
Oh, nice.
The operas are so much fun.
Yeah.
They're just the best.
A lot of them I don't think I've seen. I know A Star for Kitty, which that's really high up there in the numbers. That's like episode 1565. And then there's some specials too. So, and some of those you can get probably on like eBay and stuff, where you can get them like on tape if you've got a working VHS player.
Mm-hmm.
If you want some specific things to, but it's a really good resource, because then it gives you the air date, and if there's anything notable. A lot of them have screenshots. So any guests that appear in them, what songs appear in it, and then they've got a whole page with all the songs with the lyrics, all the song lyrics, which there's a lot of music. He wrote he didn't write the music, but he wrote the lyrics to pretty much everything that you hear. It was actually can't find it now. The Johnny Costa was the music director from 68 to 96. And then Michael Morix took over after Costa died, and then he stayed until the series ended in 2001. So Costa did a lot of the piano and the trolley whistle. It was very simple music. Like piano, light percussion, maybe like a double bass, like an upright bass, some guitar. Joe Negri, who was also one of the neighbors, and is a accomplished guitarist. He still performs to this day, and is releasing music. There's one of the like I mentioned before, when I just want background noise, I'll listen to like some just background music, and there's a couple where it's they just call it like coffee house jazz or bossa nova or whatever, but it instantly makes me think about the music from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So because it's very simple, like quartet, not overly produced, just type of music. And I'm like, yeah, I could see myself walking down the streets of the neighborhood to this music. I could see the panorama of the miniatures in my head while listening to this type of music. But anyway, as I was saying, unless anybody has anything else they want to bring up about the show itself before we move on to like the legacy.
No, I think I'm good.
Yep.
I'm good.
So obviously the show ends in 2001. Fred passes in 2003, unfortunately, due to stomach cancer. They held a private service for friends and family, and then they had a more public service, which I believe it showed up in my recommended YouTube recommendations, but I didn't click on it because I didn't really want to cry at the moment.
Right.
But I think you can watch it. But yeah, he's just, the show and Fred himself has just kind of lived on, and probably will for a while. Again, that website, Neighborhood Archive, they've got a page where Mr. Rogers and or the television series have been mentioned in popular culture. Mm-hmm. Either he's made an appearance like on a talk show, or he's been, just name dropped in different instances, like in Full House. There's at one point Rebecca pokes fun at Danny because he's wearing a sweater, and she's like, that Mr. Rogers sweater didn't give you away at all.
Well, like even epic rap battles did when it was Mr. Rogers versus Mr. T.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
They did the his Senate testimonial on drunk history, and it was actually Colin Hanks played Mr. Rogers on that episode of Drunk History.
Yeah,
That's pretty funny.
So
Saturday Night Live has brought it up.
Oh yeah,
a lot. I mean, they mentioned Mr. Robinson in the in the documentary from last year. The Casper in that movie. Casper's watching an episode of Mr. Rogers. There's just lots of different places. The Simpsons. The Simpsons parodies everybody.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, one that people may not realize If y'all, this is a throwback. If people remember the show Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman,
Yes.
there was a episode in the 4th season called "Deal with the Devil," and it includes a Reverend Johnson, who played by Fred Rogers. This was the only time that Fred appeared on TV not as himself.
Huh.
Yeah. Or Reverend Thomas. There's a Reverend Johnson, and then he plays Reverend Thomas, the mentor to Reverend Johnson. So, but yeah, this is the only time that he ever appeared not as himself. So, every other time he's been playing himself. So, or really pretty much playing himself. Like when he appeared on Sesame Street.
Yep. Now that one was interesting because he had wanted to like do a behind the scenes of, here's how the Muppets work, and there's an actual person inside Big Bird, but the Sesame, the Muppet Workshop was like, well, no, that's not how we do things. We want to keep the mystery, I guess. So it was like they both had differing opinions on how to do that crossover for good reasons, and so it was kind of like a agree to disagree sort of thing. So when like Big Bird came over to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, he was only in the neighborhood of make believe, whereas in Sesame Street, Big Bird's walking down the street and he just randomly bumps into Mr. Rogers. And so it's really cute, and it all just kind of works out for everybody. But I was just like, that was like, one of the few instances I'm like, wow, Mr. Rogers, like, yes, he was kind, yes, he was sweet. He also had his opinions and he disagreed with people. And he disagreed.
Apparently it was Carol Spinney specifically.
Yeah.
That didn't want to break the aura of Big Bird.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, these are two guys that we're all like, we love and adore from our childhoods, and it's just like, it's interesting. But they were, they still managed to make it work.
Yep. So, but thankfully, the legacy lives on to this day. And like I was starting to say earlier, is if you're either in the area, live in the area, although if you live in the area, odds are you've probably been to one of these spots. But you can get to the area, which I did earlier this year. This was the road trip that Chauncey and I took earlier this year. I called it our Rogers and Rogers road trip, because first we went to Pittsburgh. And then we went to Philadelphia for the Marvel exhibit. So, from Fred Rogers to Captain Rogers. But because Pittsburgh is the larger city where, Fred was born and grew up, and obviously, the show, the network was from Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh is kind of his home. There's several places that you can kind of experience Mr. Rogers, I guess. In Pittsburgh, at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, they used to have a more extensive exhibit. It's been traveling, and it was traveling, and then it was given to the Children's Museum in Louisiana, New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina. So what they have now is pared down from what they used to have, but they still have one of his sweaters, pair of his sneakers, some of the puppets, and some pictures that you can see on display, which we did not go to the Children's Museum. We went to the Heinz History Center, which they still have, and hopefully this becomes a permanent part of the museum, is an exhibit that includes a wax figure of Mr. Rogers sitting in his living room, acting like he's getting ready to change his shoes. They've got one of his sweaters that his mom made, pair of his shoes, lots of props and puppets, and like the castle, King Friday's castle, and the tree from the neighborhood of Make Believe Exit and Henrietta Pussycat's tree. I walked in and I saw the tree first because it's like the first thing you see, and I cried. I'm kind of crying just thinking about it. Like there's like a video loop playing, so you get a little bit of the music, and Mr. Rogers singing. I'm like, oh, like my childhood. It is really cool because you get to see like the tree more close up and see what it was made out of. And of course, the castle. The Children's Museum here in Indianapolis years ago, this had to have been like 2003 or 4-ish. They had, it was a temporary exhibit, and they had, it was a replica of the living room entrance, so the door and the bench, and where you can change your shoes and pretend to change your shoes. And they're a replica of the castle that you could actually climb up into and take your picture. So I have a couple of pictures from me of that. I don't have a lot because that was, again, early 2000s. Smartphones, being able to take 20,000 photos a second was not a thing then. It's old school kids, I tell you. I think I was still using film then, to be honest with you. And then I've got lots of pictures from when we went to Pittsburgh earlier this year. And then there is a memorial statue right on the river in Pittsburgh that unfortunately we did not get a chance to get to, but it's this huge like bronze statue of Mr. Rogers sitting down tying his shoe, and it's got sound added, so you can go and every now and then it'll play like a quote from Mr. Rogers or a piece of one of the songs or something like that. So and then one of his sweaters is at the Smithsonian in Washington. I'm sure probably part of the TV and music popular culture bit that the Smithsonian has. So if you go to Pittsburgh, it's Fred Rogers Central.
Admit I've never been to Pittsburgh, even though I live in the same state.
You need to.
It's technically on the other side of the state.
I know. You come this way, stop in Pittsburgh, and then keep going and come see me.
There you go.
I did it for you.
True.
And then there's obviously all the television, both his series, his appearances on other people's, television shows. You can find a lot of that on YouTube and the interwebs and all that fun stuff. And then, of course, now we've got the documentary, which came out last year, which makes me cry every time I see it. And Shirley would have been at least an Oscar contender in the documentary category if it had got nominated. I don't know why it didn't even get nominated, but
because it was a nice subject. It was something that was talking about someone good and sweet and honorable, and we can't have good things.
Well, at least as far as documentaries are concerned.
Yeah, as far as documentaries go, we have to have people, with conflict and hating each other, which, there was some mention of that in the documentary, and there was some for contrast, and then there's like,
Yeah.
but here's how Fred dealt with it, and it's like,
Yeah. But
sorry, I'm a cynic. I
Yeah.
mean, I love Mr. Rogers. He did a lot of good stuff. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But
yeah. But now we have A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
yes,
which
Tom Hanks
is-
looks amazing as Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Just like I saw that, and I'm like, okay, no, it's Tom Hanks, but darn if it doesn't look like Mr. Rogers too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So apparently, this movie has actually been in like production limbo for almost a decade.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah. There was talks about doing it like 10 years ago, and there was like a script like 8 years ago, according to Tom Hanks. That's when he first heard about it. He first heard about it 10 years ago and read a script for it 8 years ago. So, but it's just been in production limbo for, I don't know, whatever reason, for all of this time. And then they finally got to the point where they were actually ready to go forward. And I guess the producer director, Marielle Heller, what's her actual like? I think she's the director. Yeah, she's the director. She is friends with Colin Hanks, Tom Hanks' son, and apparently she pitched the movie to Colin, and was able to go through him to get it to Tom, saying, okay, yeah, you may have read the script so long ago, but we're actually ready to do it now. And Tom apparently had told his agents that he wanted a break from playing real life people.
Oh.
Because this is now the 8th film where he's portrayed an actual person from real life.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Apollo 13, Sully, the Captain one.
Yep.
Walt Disney.
Yes, Walt
Yep.
Disney.
Yeah. And Mr. Rogers and 2 others.
I hope he knows that he's going to have to play Bob Ross now to complete the trifecta.
Yeah. Although I don't think they could get him. I don't think he'd do a very good Steve Irwin.
Yeah, somebody else is going to have to play Steve Irwin, but he could do Bob Ross probably. But according to Fred's widow, Joanne, she says that Tom Hanks is the perfect actor to play him. Yeah, so this has just been kind of been in limbo, and actually even the release date has got pushed back. It was supposed to be released last month, and then they pushed it to this month. So
maybe to capitalize on Oscar season or something. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, according to IMDb, which is always accurate, but
all the time.
Yeah, but according to IMDb, part of the reason why it took so long is because they worked with Fred's estate to make this as accurate as possible. So that they, going into the archives and watching, video and obviously recreating the sets for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the puppets, because the puppets used in the movie are not originals. They are recreations actually made by the puppet makers who make the puppets for Sesame Street. So they've been working behind the scenes to make this as accurate as possible, which it is. I mean, as far as like any of the scenes that take place on the set of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, like it looks great. The puppets look great. All the props look great. The people that they cast to play some of the, because we don't get like all of the neighbors. We get Mr. McFeely and Lady Aberlin. Not as spot on as Tom Hanks is, but they're, they work. It's really, this is one of those things that I did not occur to me until I was actually watching the movie that yes, Tom Hanks is playing Fred Rogers as, the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the guy that this, the man that is this guy interviews for this magazine article. But Fred Rogers on the show was also the main puppeteer and the voices for most of the characters in the neighborhood of Make Believe. So Tom Hanks has to play Mr. Rogers playing King Friday or Daniel Striped Tiger. Which that did not occur to me that was a thing that he would have to do.
Yeah.
Until you actually see it in the movie. So it's like he's playing someone else.
Well, and like the other day when we were watching one, and like it was like all the characters or most of the characters from Neighborhood of Make Believe were on screen, and they were all talking, so you could hear King Friday, you could hear Queen Sarah, you could hear Daniel Striped Tiger, there was Henrietta Pussycat, and there was Lady Elaine, and I'm just like, okay, Mr. Rogers, how the heck did you do that? I mean, they probably had other people working the puppets and he just did the voices or something, but I was just like really floored that I'm like, dang, he was really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Hanks, I mean, I'm sure they figured something out in the movie, but that's just, it's like you just kind of have to realize just how talented the man was to do all those things. I mean, and some of the lines those puppets come out, especially Lady Elaine. Holy cow! It's like he definitely had a sense of humor.
Considering Lady Elaine Fairchild was modeled after his sister.
That always cracked me up. It's like I'm sure he was kind of a cheeky big brother.
But it's a good movie. It's a beautifully done movie. Hanks, once again, the man's I don't want to say he's a chameleon because he's not like some other actors, like your Daniel Day-Lewis's or some others where they disappear into the role. It's Tom Hanks. His accent is not exactly right, but he's got the mannerisms and the cadence and like the volume and all of that, so that it's that feel that you get from listening to Mr. Rogers talk. And they do a great job with the costuming and the hair and the makeup, but that's the thing with Tom Hanks is like, and eventually he'll get drawn out of the hat and we'll dive more into the genius that is Tom Hanks, but he's not someone that he's not like other actors in the way that they work their way into a role or you expect them to act in a certain way, but he always gives the best performance, if that makes sense. So it's like, that he is giving this everything he's got, even if it's not, this isn't an action movie. It's kind of dramatic, but not overly dramatic. it's happy, but without being overly saccharine. It's got some sad bits, but it's not going to necessarily make you cry like the documentary does. Although there are times where I had to dab my eyes, watching this. It's an interesting way they've decided to tell this story, of this particular point, because really it's about the guy, the journalist, going to interview Fred Rogers for this article and how his experience meeting Fred impacts his life as opposed to the other way around. Mm-hmm. It's like there's this guy that we all know and love, Mr. Rogers, but what happens when somebody meets him, and what kind of ripple effect does someone like Fred Rogers have on someone who is not in the best spot mentally and emotionally, as the case with this journalist. So, and I don't necessarily, it's not really anything like major, like that I could spoil, but it's just the way that it's told. Mm-hmm. They do some interesting things as far as transitions from one scene to another. There's a bit where it gets a little, I don't want to say it's a dream sequence, but I guess it's best way to put it. And it's kind of surreal, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I don't have to, it's interesting because it's not a straightforward true story. Mm-hmm. I guess is the best way to put it, but it's a great movie. It's rated PG. I mean, there's not anything in there that's, obviously, it may be a bit boring for kids, but, if they're old enough to sit through something like this, then, it's perfectly safe for them to watch. And I guess we'll see what come, awards, when we get into like Oscar season, whether, Tom Hanks can score at least, he'll probably get a nomination because they really like bio movies. Yeah. So they really like it when people play real life people. So,
yeah. So we'll see.
Yep. I'm glad I got to see it early. So, yeah, I will definitely go see it again because obviously Chauncey has not seen it, but it's good. It's really, really good. So,
yeah. Well, I will say this one thing, and maybe this is ending on a downer note, but this has always just kind of struck me, and it probably doesn't mean anything to anybody other than me. But so like the year that Mr. Rogers passed away, 2003, that was the year I graduated from high school.
Ooh.
And yeah. And then also, and again, this only applies to me probably, that was also the year that John Stockton retired from basketball, who he was like my favorite basketball player going back when I was Alex's age, him and Carl.
Wow, yeah.
So there's always just been kind of this odd symmetry in my mind. Like the year I graduated high school, that's traditionally the year that, you go off into the adult world. Two of my icons from childhood died and retired. So I've just kind of always had this thing in my mind. It was like, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little existential here, and I apologize if people think this is weird, but it was just sort of like the universe's way of saying, okay, you're done being a little kid. You gotta go. It's like kicking me out of the nest, sort of, in a weird way. And I was like, you've learned everything, you need to know, sort of a thing. And so it's always just kind of been in my mind, like, that was just an odd year for me, and that those things happened. And it was like, but at the same time, it's just kind of like I said, going back and rewatching those old episodes with Alex, with my son, this has also kind of been a way of saying, like, Mr. Rogers kind of helped, was a core part of teaching me how to be an adult and how to deal with things, and how to deal with things like, parenting, now that I'm a parent, or, just life in general. And I kind of, and with this whole, resurgence of interest in the show, and what, with these movies and the documentary that came out, it's just I don't know, it's very poignant to me, and or maybe I just think too much into this stuff, just because I kind of have that connection. But it just feels like maybe it's coming back at just the right time for me anyway, and maybe other people feel the same way, and I kind of hope they do.
I think it's coming back. I think we need some Mr. Rogers in our life.
Yeah.
Right now.
And it's
That's
not like
exactly it.
Yeah, and I feel like, because I saw a comic, it was like a young person talking to an older person, and the young person is very is kind of grousing at the older person, like, how can you be so positive? How can you do this? And the older person's like, well, in my lifetime, and he lists off all these terrible things that have happened in his lifetime, like wars, assassinations, stock market crashes, you name it, they've been through it. And this guy is like, you know what? Bad things have always been around, so I can either be upset about it, or I can try to, have a positive outlook and look at the good things. And you know what? And maybe that's what Mr. Rogers was trying to teach us. Is like, yeah, there's bad stuff, but there's also plenty of good stuff too. So try to be one of the good things in the world.
I think that's a good note.
Yes. So anyway, I hope so go out there, go do something nice for somebody else.
Yeah.
Whether that's, go bake some cookies for your neighbor, or help mow a lawn, or just be nice to somebody out there.
Don't save all the kindness for just World Kindness Day. So.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Maybe should we issue, I don't know, I kind of feel like I want to issue a challenge, like somebody just, to our listeners, just go out and do something nice for somebody else.
Yeah.
And be mindful of that. So,
Yep.
And on that note, if any of you have any thoughts or memories of Mr. Rogers, or anything you want to add to our discussion, you can send us feedback. Our email address is fiveishfangirls@gmail.com. You can also visit us at our website, which is thefiveishfangirls.com. You can find our show notes, all the links that Rachel mentioned. And I've just kind of been poking around the neighborhood archive here, and there's a lot here. So, definitely go poke around and see what there is to see.
Consume vast quantities of Mr. Rogers.
Yes. And you can also get through our website. You can get to our social media. You can also leave comments on like Facebook or Instagram or our YouTube channel. You can also download us on wherever you get podcasts. We're pretty much everywhere. So look for us there. Also leave a review if you feel so inclined. And if you would like to support us financially, we have Patreon, we have Amazon store, we have a merchandise shop. And we thank you for your support, because we can't do this without you. And we're very grateful to everybody who's sent us, whether it's feedback or a donation, whatever you got. We love you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being our neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed.
With that, we shall sign off for this week.
This is Brittany in the neighborhood saying goodnight.
This is Christy saying goodnight from the neighborhood.
This is Holly from the neighborhood saying good evening.
And this is Rachel, also in the neighborhood. And of course, we can't end the show any other way. So if you weren't sick of me singing, here you go.
Should we all sing?
Feel free to join in. It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling.
Growing
You're
inside,
growing
and when you
inside.
wake up, ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling, the feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. You always make each day such a special day. You know how? By just your being you. Only one person in the whole world like you. That's you yourself. I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. You can find more episodes and information at thefivishfangirls.com. Any and all books, movies, games, and any other forms of media mentioned are owned and operated by the respective copyright holders. No copyright infringement is intended or implied. If you wish to support the show, the easiest way is to leave us a rating and review. More ratings and reviews will make it easier for others to find the show. If you wish to support us monetarily, you can do so at patreon.com/5ishfangirlspodcast. All money goes towards fees and equipment to keep the show going. For official Five-ish Fangirls merchandise, visit redbubble.com/people/5ishfangirls. We love hearing from our listeners and encourage feedback. You can email us at fiveishfangirls@gmail.com. You can also like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/5ishfangirls. Thank you so much for listening, and may the squee be with you.